skip. It's this real player for all those flashback people. My name is Tom Callaway. I am a senior software engineer at Red Hat, and I'm going to talk today about understanding free and open source licenses without a lawyer. Now, we have to put this disclaimer in because, you know, I work for Red Hat and there are actual lawyers at Red Hat and they would like me to say these following things. I'm not a lawyer. I've not passed the bar anywhere. You should not be construing anything that I give you in this talk as legal advice, because it's not. Legal advice is a very specific term. Only lawyers may give you legal advice. I can give you my own personal opinion on anything, but it does not construe legal advice. If you go and you act upon these things and you end up getting eaten by wolves, I'm not responsible. So, and neither is Red Hat. Now, I'm going to talk very, very briefly about what open source is, because it helps when we start to talk about how licensing works if I spend a few slides talking about open source. Now, I hope that everyone who showed up for SELF has some idea of open source. Is there anybody in the room that does not understand open source? Cool. All right. So we're gonna skip past some of this, but the core meat of what makes free and open source software work is these three concepts: the capacity to share, the capacity to collaborate, and the capacity to remix. These simple concepts make up everything that empower our communities as a whole. So when we start to talk about what licensing means in these contexts, keep these in the back of your mind, because that's what we're trying to accomplish. Is we're trying to create a legal framework that allows us to do these three things and actually encourages people to do these three things. Now, sharing is important because with sharing, we want other people to be able to leverage the work that we do, and we want to be able to leverage the work that other people do. And so we want the license to empower us to do this thing. So if you write this fantastic IRC client, you want other people to be able to add their own works to it, to be able to do all this stuff, but it starts with them being able to get it at all. And so if the only way they can get it is through this set of restrictive mechanisms, or by having to go and do this thing in order to get that other thing, and all of these rules prevent someone else from getting access to it, that fundamental concept of being able to share is important. Now, in the United States, the way that the Copyright Act is structured is such that if someone has it legally, then they can use it, barring any other agreement that says that they can't. But if you have no other license, then you have the right to at least share if you've gotten it legally. Collaboration is really the strength, though. Collaboration is when you're able to work together on something, and the license needs to be able to permit that. If I can see your cool IRC client, but I can't actually make a change to it, then I can't collaborate with you on it. I can't fork it. I can't improve it. I cannot refine it. The best I might be able to do is write some sort of third-party add-on module for it. And we all know about how that sort of works in a broader sense, where you have this proprietary application and a tiny little module API, and you spend the rest of your life making Photoshop add-ons because that's all you can do. You can never actually improve Photoshop. You can just make these little add-ons for it. And then remixing is really the ability to take someone else's work, make changes to it, and then have it live its own life as your work. Now, sure, their copyright is still in the mix, but we want the license to be able to allow people to take your IRC client, turn it into a monitoring tool, and be able to have that monitoring tool live a life of its own without every time having to say, well, no, you've got to go get that IRC client, start, and then make these changes onto it. And again, we're all probably very familiar with situations where you have to do this sort of modding onto a piece of software just to get it to do the thing you want it to do. I think if you look at gaming, you see that pretty aggressively in games like Grand Theft Auto 5, where there's a ton of people that are trying to mod that environment. And some of those games actually encourage that, but it's not true remixes. You're still having to start with GTA 5 and then add your mod and then go from there. Now, I've already used some of this terminology, but it's important that we get a level set for it before we go any deeper. Copyright is a legal term that means the legal rights granted to the creator of an original work by law. Now, some things are not copyrightable. We could spend an hour talking about what is and is not copyrightable. For the purposes of this brief introduction, assume that your work is copyrightable. The most common example of how to achieve copyright is by getting a cocktail napkin and drawing something original on it. Congratulations, you have copyright on that work. Copyright does not need to be registered. You can register it, but you don't have to. Registering copyright makes it easier later when someone infringes upon it for you to actually claim that you had it when you had it, and not that they had it and you're infringing the other way around. It just establishes a order of when the copyright existed, but it's not required. You can still win in court without it if you have to. Now, legalese is not English. And that's the most common mistake that people, especially hackers, when they look at a license, they assume that because I am parsing these words, they are in English, that I understand what this license says. It's not correct. Legalese is actually what that license is written in. And it is used by lawyers, and it seems to resemble English from a distance, but it is not. So do not assume that lawyers are just having fun with their caps lock key when they're capitalizing words in a license. That is all part of the legalese syntax, and it means something special. Software licenses are written in legalese. Every now and then I come across one that's written in English, and it's always bad. If it's not written in legalese, it doesn't actually mean anything. Even if it parses in English the way you would think it is, if you try to parse that through in legalese, it comes out as gibberish. Now, the point of a software license is to tell the user what they can and cannot do with the software they possess. And we're going to assume that they possess the software legally, because that's an entirely different branch of discussion that I'm not going to worry about. But proprietary licenses traditionally will tell you, don't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, you must not do that, don't ever do that, don't do these things, don't ever take this outside, don't light it on fire, don't feed it to your pets, don't give it to your friends, don't, pages and pages and pages and pages of don'ts. If you've ever read the Apple, you'll see all these wonderful things about what you cannot do with the software they've given you. Very little about what you can do. So free and open source licenses do the opposite. They pull a magic trick, and they focus on telling you what you can do with the software that you possess. So this is the point in the talk where I start talking a little bit about the open source versus free software. And I'm going to get this out of the way, because inevitably, if I don't, someone raises their hand at the end of it and it's like, well, what's free software? Why is that different? And I use the terms interchangeably in common practice, but they do mean slightly different things. The open source definition is a list of 10 criteria that a license must meet in order to be considered open source. And they're up on the website. I'm not going to read them out to you. You can go and hunt them down if you care, if you're worried about whether your license is open source or not. They're pretty straightforward. Most people can look at those and immediately determine whether their license is meeting that criteria or not. Shockingly, the one group of people that can't seem to apply this common sense definition to their license to determine it is corporate lawyers. But they have a special part in the universe, and we're not going to judge them too hardly for that. But the idea here is that you want to be able to not restrict people in any meaningful way from doing what they want to do with your code. And that's what the open source definition tries to accomplish. Free software basically tries to accomplish the same thing, but with different words. I'm not going to get into a religious war about who's right or who's wrong on this front. I think that they both mean well, and I think if you lock two of them in the same room, that they'll basically come out agreeing that they're saying the same thing with different words. The exception to that is copyleft. And copyleft is the recognition that people are not genuinely good. People mean well most of the time, but they are not genuinely good. And that you cannot count on 100 people doing the right thing 100% of the time. And so copyleft basically says, if you take a work that's under a copyleft license and you make changes and you distribute that work, that you must distribute that work and your changes under the same license. And that is specifically because people had taken non-copyleft licenses like MIT and BSD and did not give their resulting derived works under the same license terms because they were not required to. This is people taking advantage of an ecosystem that relies upon collaboration and sharing and then saying, screw you guys, I'm going to make my money and nobody else improves. And the Free Software Foundation didn't like that approach very much and didn't appreciate it. And so they came up with a license that doesn't let you do that. It doesn't let you cheat. And there's a whole class of people that believe strongly that we ought to be enforcing this as part of the license to prevent people from cheating the system. And then there's a whole bunch of people that are dependent upon the goodwill of the system to actually hold true. And I legitimately think that most people using non-copyleft licenses intend for the copyleft effect to happen in their scenarios. And in most of these communities, it does just happen. People pick up non-copyleft open source works, make changes, contribute them back under the same license. Copyleft just enforces that and makes it strict. And then this is a lovely picture of the Free Software Foundation, because sometimes when I give this talk, I get a little angry, and I want to make sure that I know that we're all still friends. I love them. They do fantastic work. I think they do amazing things for the community, and Linux and GNU, good friends. All right, more terminology, because there's a quiz after this. Trademark. Trademark is a distinctive design, picture, emblem, logo, wording, some sort of a mark used to identify a product and its manufacturer. Trademarks are useful because what a trademark says is the thing that has that mark on it means something different from the thing that doesn't have that mark on it. If I have a car and it has a Ford logo on it versus a truck with a Chevy logo on it, those aren't the same truck. They're not the same vehicle. There's something that's different and that I can expect. And now sometimes that connotation is good, Ford good. Sometimes that connotation is bad, Ford bad. I'm not here to judge that. The mark is intended to be an indicator to the consumer that this thing has a connotation. Generally, they want that to be a positive connotation. That when you go and you look for something and you see that branding, you go, oh, I like that. I like that fashion label. I like that product. I like the work they do. They produce quality works. And I see that brand and it means something to me. It means that I know that there's a higher likelihood that this is either going to be very good or very bad, depending on my connotation to the mark. Now, this is useful in an open source context because what it means is that you can use trademarks to achieve that same branding consistency with your work. If something is Apache, then we have a connotation around I like Apache. They make good software. I think this is probably going to be good software. I should check it out. And it also helps to distinct and make the work that you're doing unique. So that if I release something under an open source license, I can then put my trademark on it and say, this is Red Hat Enterprise Linux. People have an expectation of something from Red Hat and they go, hey, you know, Red Hat. But you can take that same open source code, take the Red Hat trademark off it, put your mark on it, and then say, hey, no, this is actually CentOS. This is actually Scientific Linux. This is actually some other kind of Linux. And the mark differentiates what you've done, your remixed version of that open source work in a different way. And so people know that there's a similarity between the two, maybe, but then the mark helps you to sell it without having to worry about running into the license part of things. The license still frees you to make the changes. The trademark just says, this came from me. And this is where sometimes these get a little bit confusing in the context of licensing, because people are like, why do I have to take the trademark off? Why can't I just open source the trademark? Well, unfortunately, the law doesn't work this way. The way that the law works in the United States and in most of the world is that if you don't defend your trademark, you lose it. It's not the way with copyright. Copyright, you keep it forever and ever, no matter what, pretty much, unless you abandon it. With trademark, you have to actively defend the mark. And that's so that people don't run around saying, I'm Red Hat. No, I'm Red Hat. We're all Red Hat. We're all running around saying we're Red Hat. And then it becomes impossible for anyone to know what that means. That mark becomes diluted. And it is the job of the trademark holder to prevent that. And so the trademark holder has to take actions to make sure that nobody's running around claiming that they are using the mark and they are representing that the people behind that mark incorrectly. So this is why you see people who cease and desists when they're using marks inappropriately or in a way that is confusing. So if you started a Linux company that was Dead Cat with a red cat that's like that, we'd probably come after you for trademark infringement because it was confusing in the market. You also can't do what's called a naked license, and that sounds way more fun than it should. But basically a naked license is when you tell everybody, do whatever you want with the mark, which is what Debian has been doing since day one. But if you do this and then someone comes along and decides they're going to make a lovely batch of hate speech that prominently uses your trademark, hopefully that won't happen for Debian. I'm not actually advocating for that to happen. But you go and you say, hey, you're infringing upon my trademark. They will go to court and they will point out politely to the judge that you let anyone use the mark for whatever you wanted. And the judge will be like, you did, naked license. You can't stop somebody from using it once you've naked licensed it effectively out there. And then the mark becomes unenforceable by you, and anyone can do anything they want with it at any time. Now, for some people, that's fine. They don't care. They're using the trademark solely for generic branding of everything, but for the vast majority of people, they do not actually wish their trademark to be released to anyone to do anything they want with. It's arguable that the Tux Penguin might actually be in this state, given the massive amount of cases in which he's been used, but we won't get into that. I'm not trying to actually advocate that, you know, we should abandon Tux. Patents. Patents are more complicated. There's two definitions for patents. A noun definition is that it is a set of exclusive rights granted to an inventor for a limited period of time in exchange for public disclosure of their invention. This is actually listed in the Constitution as intended to spur innovation. It doesn't actually do that anymore, but that's what the intent was. The other definition is obvious when something is patent. It is an adjective. And I always found that humorous because the vast majority of patents in our system today are plainly obvious. Let's get back to it, but patents, the idea behind patents is that you come up with something, some clever invention, some clever design, some new way of solving a problem in a device or in a mechanism. The better mousetrap is the sort of reference standard for this. And then you take your better mousetrap down to the patent office and you say, I have found a better way to catch mice. I would like to patent that way. And so they document it, they put it up on the patent site, they give you a patent, and for a window of time known as a patent term, you are the exclusive producer of that type of mousetrap. Anyone can see how you made the better mousetrap, but no one else may do that unless they pay you a patent license. You can choose to sell them a license or not to sell them a license. But when your patent term is up, everyone can make that better mousetrap. Now, there was supposed to be something that said that you weren't supposed to be able to patent certain types of things like math that are, if you will avoid, apologize for my use of the phrase, patently obvious. And yet that has happened repeatedly over and over and over again. When software started to become patentable in the late 80s, lots of stuff got patented that was obvious or was math or was straightforward. And what you found in the industry was that patent lawyers started to realize that they were sitting on a gold mine and started to actually turn the legalese up to 11 in the patents so that the patents are almost unreadable even by lawyers now because they're intentionally written to be as vague as humanly possible so that they apply to the broadest set of things. So you have software patents on clicking things. You have software patents on putting a printer in a box. You have software patents on any number of ideas and concepts that we all go, well, we've been doing that since 1973. How in the world could that be patentable now in 2015? The patent office is unqualified, unprepared, and vastly under-resourced to deal with these things. And so the vast majority of them, if the legalese checks out, the patent gets approved. And so we're in a situation now where it is highly likely that any net new software creations are infringing upon somebody's patent somewhere. And it is functionally impossible for us as developers and non-lawyers to go through this process and sanely review to check to see if that's the case. So the best that we can do is to move forward and hope that we're not infringing something that somebody's going to come around and demand money for. And certainly there are cases where known patents are more obvious than others. You have cases like Media Codex, where there's a large consortium of people with a vested interest in getting royalty money from that, who make it very clear to anyone who will stop and listen or do a Google search that MP3 is patented, that MPEG is patented, and that you need to pay a royalty for that. And so if you go to court and say, I had no idea these were patented, the judge is going to look at you like, really? Come on. But if you build some sort of complicated elevator control software and then you discover later that there's an obscure patent that was filed by a web retailer to try to, you know, make money off of checkout systems that they somehow managed to apply to elevator control systems, you probably have a more reasonable case to say, I had no idea this would apply to that. Now, in software patents or traditional patents, you often see these diagrams. And again, we go back to our better mousetrap, where you have a picture of the mousetrap and it would show the hinge and the cheese and all of these things in the right place. And you say, oh, that's cool. But in software patents, you get documents that when you translate them from legalese back to English, they roughly look like that. And it doesn't mean anything. It's just there because that's the form that patents have for filling out stuff. They strongly encourage you to have diagrams and flows, and so you have these disgustingly horrible flow charts that don't actually mean anything inside of patents, and they're there just to fill in that box more than anything else because the patent office is expecting to see that, and if it sees that, oh, that must be a good patent. But the high price of patents is significant in our community, especially because patents aren't spurring innovation. They aren't motivating people to see that mousetrap and go, well, you know, if I make this one change, I can even make a better mousetrap. And if we're being honest, they never really worked that way. Not in the United States, not in the way they were intended. Maybe in the British sense, in the previous system, you know, pre-colonies, you know, they worked in some sort of fashion. But in our modern, always-on, digitally connected universe, they certainly don't work. Having a patent term that's 20 plus years is disgustingly too long in our digital connected world. If you look back at patents in the 1800s, where the only way you would learn about a patent is going down to the patent office in DC, or sending a telegram to ask about a patent, or having somebody tell you about it from a newspaper article, okay, maybe 20 years might be a reasonable time for them to hone that rights, because they would have the time to be able to bring it to market, make a product off it, make some money off of it, and then you would be able to build something off of it. So there's a lot of research that was done around the Watt's steam engine, where he patented a specific design for a steam engine. And lots of people found out about it because there were steam trains going everywhere, and the steam engine was in common use in a lot of mining equipment and a lot of construction equipment. So people found out about this much more efficient engine model and wanted to improve upon it, but could not, because he refused to license the patent to anyone but himself. And so he would just make engines, and if you worked for his company, you could make some minor improvements and they would put a new one out to market, and he had a series of patents. But when all of his patents expired, the efficiency of the steam engine shot up literally within a year. You can track the years of his patent and how it actually prevented significant growth in the performance of the steam engine technology. And then his patents start to expire and it goes whoosh, because everyone was waiting for that patent to expire, not because they wanted to, because they tried to license his patent and to build off of it, and he would not. And so his enforcement of using the patent sort of as a stick rather than a carrot to spur innovation prevented the steam engine from taking off in the ways that it did. And it's sort of a historical thing. If you look at it from a steampunk alternate history perspective, if he hadn't done that, what would we be looking at now in regards to steam technology? We might be in a very different place. But modern patents are used as nuclear weapons. Companies are acquiring arsenals of as many of them, as vague of them as they can, and pointing them at other people and saying, if you come at me with your patents, I'll come at you with mine. It is the game of mutually assured destruction in software patents. And you see all of the major players are being forced to do it. Microsoft, Oracle, Google, all these people are buying companies not because they're interested in their technologies, but because they like their patents. Patent portfolios are going up on auction and bringing absurd amounts of money. Sun admitted in court that for several years, they were actually encouraging their engineers to patent the most ludicrous, crazy, absurd things. And this is in case law reference, because they got pulled into the discussion in one of their cases where literally all of their top engineers were saying, look, I patented garbage. I consciously patented stuff that was BS, because this was what we were being told to do. And so you have all these patents that are, you know, functionally, if you would go back and say, well, I can find all these references of prior art, and you can convince the patent office to hire someone to look at them and will understand what you're talking about, then maybe you can get one or two of these thrown out. But we're talking about hundreds of these being filed every month. We're just filling and filling and filling this bucket with rancid, dead, disgusting awfulness. And that's the world that we live in. And then eventually somebody figured out that you could try to make money off of these by, if you had enough of these, or even just one that was reasonably enough that you could convince a court or jury, in the case of the Eastern District of Texas, that this patent infringes upon that other thing. And it's very easy if you go down to the Eastern District of Texas, where they have their patent system is structured around jury trial. And so you bring all these people in to determine whether this patent on software is infringing upon this other software, with people who in general, when polled, cannot use a mouse and do not have an email account. They are forced to answer the question of, did this patent infringe? And most of these people, because of the general political leanings of the folks in that part of the world, determine that, yeah, you've been infringing upon it. You've taken money from the man. That's not okay. It's this disgustingly broken system where people will literally have a shell office open in this region so that they can file patent cases in this district to put a case in front of people that aren't too bright and don't know computers very well to determine that, yes, you did infringe a patent when you didn't actually. And this is why you think, okay, fine, I take this to court in Texas. Some local people that don't know how to use a computer determine that I infringed a patent. So what? What's the worst that happens? I have to pay a bill? Patent suits are the most expensive litigation in the United States. And there's this lovely concept in patent suits that doesn't exist anywhere else called treble damages. And what treble damages means is that if you're found guilty of infringement, the court then immediately asks the next question: was it willful? Did you infringe upon that on purpose? And again, that's so interpretive. Asking you, did you do that on purpose? Well, no, I didn't. Well, yeah, you did. All they have to do is find some evidence that you would have reasonably known about the patent when you infringed upon it. Most of these cases where people are found guilty, willful is also found. And if you're found willfully infringing on a patent case, treble damages immediately apply, and they take the damage amount that is determined by the judge or jury, depending on the jurisdiction, and they triple it. They multiply it by 3. And we're talking on average, 7, even 8-figure damages before they're tripled in these cases. So you have a garbage patent. The people who don't know what they're talking about have determined that you violated it willfully. They put a large number amount on it to punish you because they feel like you were doing the wrong thing. Easily, it's not uncommon for these results to come out where you're $90 million down as a result of this with one patent infringement case. That's why this is so serious. That's why this is so damaging and so scary in the United States, is because a patent suit can put a company out of business. A patent suit can bankrupt a family, any number of people, all based on this chain of brokenness and incorrectness, because patent lawyers like to make money. And that all roots back to patent lawyers like to make money and have built a system where they can make a lot of money doing it. And they're not interested in tearing it down. And that's why there's no functional patent reform in the United States. I'm done ranting, I promise. All right, license, super happy, fun time. We're going to talk about some of the common licenses that are out there, give them some feedback, and this is just my opinions on them again. I'm not giving you legal advice. You should not go take this and say, well, Tom told me in this presentation that I heard itself that Apache sucked. It's not like that. I think what you want to do is you want to objectively look at these licenses and determine whether they're going to be a good fit for you, your project, your community, and your beliefs. The licenses that are out there are different because people believe different things. They believe they should be giving people different rights. They believe they should be retaining different rights. So there's 3 really big common licenses that are out there that are well known, and that is GPL, Apache, and MPL. GPL is the first one we'll talk about. I looked for a really good picture for GPL, and this is the only thing I was able to find. GPL really doesn't have anything to do with audio video repair. It's just a lovely, mashup that Google Images was able to share with me. But the idea behind the GPL is that Richard Stallman wanted to be able to create a legal framework to do copyleft. He wanted to be able to create a framework that would permit people to make changes freely, share, collaborate, remix on those works, and then if they distributed those works to other people, that they had to give their changes back. He was frustrated with people that weren't doing this, either because of the permissive license nature, and I'll talk about permissive in a bit, or because they were using proprietary code where they didn't have that right. All right. I don't know why this phone is ringing, but we'll just keep going with it. So GPL is very common. It's the most common open source license that's in use today. You'll see a lot of it out there. GPL is sometimes called viral. It's not a word I would use to describe it. It's Microsoft's word. I would say that the GPL is enforcing through copyleft the practice of keeping the cycle going in the ecosystem. And so lots of people like it. Lots of people don't like it. There's 3 versions of that license that are out there. V2 and V3 are the most common. V2 is still more common than V3 at this point, but not by much. And the big key difference between V2 and V3 is that as technology has evolved, more and more situations in which people try to loophole around various sharing requirements in the GPL have come out, and the V3 tries to close a lot of those loopholes. So if you ask me which GPL you should use, my opinion is V3 because it closes more of those loopholes. But if you're like, I really like the way 2 did it, then use 2. And you generally will find my advice is pretty much, if you like it, then use it. The Lesser Public License was created specifically because people were worried about writing a library and having that library's license apply to works that were dependent upon it. They wanted to be able to create a library and not require that license to apply down the chain. And Richard wasn't too thrilled about this concept, but he finally understood that people did want to have an open license, a free license for this, and empower people to not choose it And so that's why this was created. Now, the reason there's a very cute looking panda on the screen is because that's actually a lesser panda, and I'm trying to be clever with my slides. Permissive licenses are licenses that are structured in a way so that you can generally do whatever you want with them. The licenses are really written in a structure so that people can pick them up and do whatever they want. They can make changes, they can distribute them freely, they can sell them, they can wear them as a hat, they can eat them, they can do whatever they want with them, and there's no real restrictions around them. That's why we call them permissive. The most common examples of permissive licenses are MIT and BSD. Sometimes MIT is called the X11 license. In Fedora, we're tracking more than 25 variants of the MIT license. So if you see the MIT license and you think you should change a word just to be colorful, please don't do that. We have enough of that already. The Apache license is structured in a way that is interesting because it's one of the first open source licenses that was written originally by lawyers. And it really shows, if you look at it, it's not parsable by humans on the first pass. You've got to read it twice to figure out what's going on. And one of the key provenances in it is the Apache license was written in a time where software patents existed, whereas some of these other licenses actually predate that. And so the Apache license has an explicit patent grant built into it that says that, when you contribute things under Apache license, you're giving a patent grant back to the community for anything that you hold a patent on that is in the same work. It also acts as a contribution license, which is kind of weird. Apache wrote it so that they could use it not only for people who had the software, but for people who were contributing software back to Apache, so that they would have one license for both. And that's actually kind of a really clever legal hack in the way that they put that together. And it's really confusing to other projects that realize that they've accepted that contributory license in a way that they didn't necessarily realize when they put it on their software. It's pretty widely used. It's also pretty widely understood by lawyers. Apache version 2 had a problem in that it was, because of the way it was worded by the lawyers, it was incompatible with GPL-v2 for a very long time. And so when they rewrote GPL-v3, they did it consciously to try to resolve that incompatibility. So now there's no more real compatibility issues between GPL current and Apache current. And that is indeed an Apache helicopter made out of Lego. Mozilla public license. They looked at Apache and said, we like Apache, but we want to try to simplify this, make it a little more clear for people to parse and make it more applicable in a global sense. So the simplest way to describe Mozilla is that it is Apache with the two minor bits that the Mozilla people wanted changed. It includes more trademark discussion than the Apache license does about, taking Mozilla's works, removing the trademarks, and continuing on, and how that's acceptable, and specifically calling out the various things that are otherwise stated in trademark law, just calling them out and making them explicit. In programming, we would call these things no-ops, but in licensing, they call it extra money for the lawyer. Now, multiple license scenarios are more and more common in our community. That's when you have one code base that has multiple licenses applied to it. There are two general ways that multiple licensing happens. It's either an and or. Now, an or situation is pretty easy to understand. If a license like Perl says you can choose GPL or the artistic license, then the work is sort of Schrodinger's cat, both until you choose. And you say, okay, well, I'm going to use it under artistic. Okay, great, it's under artistic. And if at any time you go, wait, actually, I kind of wanted it under GPL. Okay, it's under GPL now. You, as the consumer and distributor, get to choose which license terms you honor. You don't have to honor both of them simultaneously. You can pick one or the other. Now, the and scenario is more complicated. The and scenario is when both licenses are applied at the same time. So if your code is licensed under GPL and BSD, then both of those licenses have to be honored in their total terms at the same time. And this is where compatibility gets fun, because you're trying to honor two different licenses at the same time. Independently, they may be free licenses, but when you try to layer them over the top and do the same thing, if one of them says you must always stand on your left foot, and the other one says you must always stand on your right foot, well, if I put both feet down, then I'm in compliance. But if it says you must only stand on your left foot, and you must only stand on your right foot, well, we've got problems. I can't comply with both of those licenses at the same time. And that's where license compatibility starts to get hard, is you have to be able to look at those licenses and say, is there anything in license A that I, in complying with, because I have to, means I can't comply with something in license B? The most common example of this is the advertising clause in the original BSD license. The original BSD license requires that you include an advertising mention. If you market the product, then you have to give an attribution. You must do it. And this conflicts with wording in the GPL that says that you don't have to do these sorts of things. And so when you're forced to do something that it says that you don't have to do, you're conflicting. And so there's no way for you to be in compliance with both licenses at the same time. Now, the BSD license fixed this many years ago by just dropping that silly clause. But there's plenty of licenses that are out there today that are written in a well-meaning way that conflict with other licenses. Now, because of the GPL is so prevalent, it's the one that most people care about from a compatibility perspective. People want to know, is my license GPL compatible? And in Fedora, we track GPL compatibility as best as we can to help people answer that question. But if you're in more complicated license mixing scenarios, like is Apache compatible with the WTFPL? I don't know, we're trying to put these together. That's when you're going to have to consult with a lawyer that has expertise in the space to really be able to answer that question. The public domain is an interesting concept. There's a whole bunch of people that are like, screw copyright, man, let's give it to the people. I'm not trying to get in the way of your, happiness. But the public domain is this legal concept of works that have gone out of copyright. That's what it means. It means that the work is no longer under copyright. Unfortunately, in the United States, works don't actually fall out of copyright anymore because of the Disney Corporation. So you can't have works that fall into the public domain. Nothing is going to fall into that black hole anymore, unless the law changes significantly. And if you notice, when Steamboat Willie is about to fall into the public domain, they pass a whole bunch of new legislation to push that date out. So I think it's very unlikely in our lifetime that we will see any new works fall into the public domain. There is, however, another way to functionally put works into the public domain, and that is to publicly and clearly abandon your copyright. Now, this works in some jurisdictions and it does not work in others. In Europe, most of Europe, you can't actually do this because you can't abandon your droit moral or your moral right. And so you can put some of your copyrights away, but not all of them. And this makes for weird sort of states where you have said to everyone, this is public domain. And then the court said, no, actually it wasn't. So what I tell people is, if you're really just wanting anyone to be able to do anything with your work, use a permissive license. Don't try to put it in the public domain. If you really just want to get as close to public domain as you can, there are licenses like Creative Commons 0, where very smart lawyers have written down all of the legal text that is necessary to get something to be functionally in the public domain in every possible way. It is pages and pages and pages and pages of legalese. It is not fun reading. But if you really want to choose that, you can. Most times what happens is when you put a work in the public domain, you say, I abandoned my copyright, you're still legally responsible for the work, even though you've said that. And someone could come around and say, well, I used your code in a medical implant device and it killed 13 people and I'm suing you for it. You didn't disclaim liability because you didn't do that, and the law doesn't require that you do it by default. So by using a permissive license, at the very minimum, you are doing a proper legal warranty disclaimer, and that is good butt covering. Documentation licenses are kind of fun. A lot of times people who are working on open source code will say, well, I'm just going to put the same code license on my docs. But documentation doesn't really work the same way that code does, and a lot of these licenses are written to be very specific to code. What is the source of a documentation? Sometimes that makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. What does the source code for a PDF look like? What is the proper editable format for a PDF? So it's easier and smarter to use one of the clever documentation licenses that's already been written for open source. If you must use the same license, use a permissive license, because those permissive licenses generally will apply to anything: documentation, fonts, a stick of butter, whatever. Don't put like a code specific license on documentation. You will appreciate me later saying that to you. Font licenses. Fonts are fun. Fonts are patentable in a weird sort of way with design patents. There's a whole different talk about fonts in that concept. Needless to say, code licenses on fonts are kind of stupid. Don't do it. There's a couple of known open font licenses that are out there. The SIL font license is a pretty good one. There's a couple others that are out there that are good open font licenses. Don't put GPL on a font license. It doesn't make any sense. It really is impossible to try to determine how that works. There's people who have standardized a font exception that makes a bad license slightly less bad, but it's still bad. If you really are doing open fonts, pick an open font license that's designed specifically for fonts. Content licenses, again, if you're using code licenses on content, that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a fantastic family of licenses that are out there called the Creative Commons licenses that are very, very good. They're well designed for content, content being art, music, anything that's not code, basically, or not a font, or not docs. Use one of those licenses. they're fantastic, and tons of people use them, and there's wide acceptance of what they mean and how they work. All right, crazy licenses. This is the part of the talk where I'm going to have to go to my notes because, you know, we want everyone to be able to understand the crazy pain that we have with this. So I have notes on these. So the JSON license. Let's see if I can make this any bigger because I can't read that tiny font. How do I do this? Zoom. That's too much. All right. So can you guys see that? Is it too small? Too big? Okay. I'm going to show you the picture real quick. Here's the JSON license. The JSON license is a permissive license in all regards. It came from the MIT license, except for one added clause. The wording is as follows: the software shall be used for good, not evil. Now, when the author of this license wrote this, he wrote good and evil in caps because he thought it would add weight to it. That's not how legalese works. That's not how any of this works. When you capitalize a term in legalese, the short summary of that is that you are referring to a term which was defined elsewhere or is defined in common legal dictionaries. As you might imagine, the terms good and evil are not defined in legal dictionaries. So what this means is that it looks to the concept of the license itself or any reference documents to help you understand what is good and what is evil. And none of these things exist. And when none of these things exist, you are dependent upon the person who has assigned the license to determine for you what is good and evil. So we literally need to go back and ask whoever released the code under this license, can you please explain to me what is good and evil in your worldview? Now, what it practically means is that no one can safely use this software because you have no idea what good or evil is unless you know this guy personally and he's given you written documentation of what those terms are defined to. You don't know what's good and what's evil. There's a fantastic story in which IBM's legal department came across the license that was under this piece of code that was under this license, and they went back to the author because they came to the same conclusion because they have lots of very smart lawyers, and they said, we would like to ask you if you could define us as either good or evil so that we can know whether we can use this software. And instead of doing that, he amended their license just for them to say that IBM was permitted to use it even though they were evil. IBM happily accepted this clause and moved on. For the rest of us, we can't use this license in any meaningful way because it has that stupid little gimmicky clause in it. We don't know whether we're good or evil, and he's not really willing to share that with us. So that's why this one is non-free. Repeatedly, he's been asked to not do this because the JSON code that he used this license under is actually pretty useful. But good or evil is going to be a problem for that. All right. The EXTLD license. Here's some bacon. All right. The EXJS software license is GPL v3. However, to download EXTLD, you also have to agree to an additional license where you agree to not develop or manufacture products which involve animal testing, not participate in the animal testing industry, not produce any products which involve any animal product, byproduct, or derivative, not produce any genetically modified organisms, not be involved with or profit from the use of animals for entertainment, or not be involved with the breeding or transport of animals for any of the previous conditions. This all sounds like a reasonable thing. I mean, really, I just want to download this software. But the way that this is worded, because this is worded in a sort of English PETA sort of way and not in a lawyer legalese sort of way, the transport of animals for any of the previous conditions, does that mean I can't take my pet anywhere if I want to use this code? These are what's known as unenforceable restrictions. They mean well, but it clearly makes the license non-free and non-open source. Now, here's another fun license, the Death and Repudiation license, or DNR. There's some skull for you there. The Death and Repudiation license states, and I'm quoting here, the software may not be used directly by any living being. Yes, you have to be dead to use software under this license. And if you aren't dead, you will be punished to the fullest extent of the law. The license goes into great detail on that. It also says, if you are a ghost or an angel, you may not loophole this license. The good news is that this license, while completely BS and non-free and non-open source, is part of an OR multi-license case in the only known instance. And the other license is BSD. So you can just choose the reasonable license and not smoke crack. All right, here's my WTFPL, my WTF Panda here. Now, if there's anyone who is uncomfortable with naughty language or under the age of, I don't know, 16, please cover your ears for a moment because we are going R-rated. The do what the fuck you want to public license, or the WTFPL, only has one real clause. You just, capitalization preserved from the license, do what the fuck you want to. Now, you think, wow, this guy's just been profane and clever. He has totally circumvented and solved the public domain problem for us entirely. You just do what you want to. I have granted permission for you to do whatever you would like. But the problem is that he didn't actually write this in legalese. I mean, that's pretty much all the wording to the license, but the license actually only applies to the license text itself. It doesn't actually work because he wrote it badly. The WTFPL starts by saying, the terms of this license as applied to this license are only thus. You do what the fuck you want to. Which tells you you can do what the fuck you want to with the license, not the work it's licensing. That said, the intent is pretty clear in that license, and most of the lawyers I've talked to, once they stopped glaring at me about this, have agreed that if you went to court with the WTFPL, it would be fairly straightforward to the judge and the jury, even in the Eastern District of Texas, what you were trying to say, and that they would probably allow that intent to trump the poor wording. The CDL, not to be confused with Cuddle, the CDDL, which is one of Sun's war crimes they committed upon us all before Oracle bought them. But the CDL, here's Elmo, specifically Chicken Dance Elmo. This is the Chicken Dance license. The CDL is a BSD-derived license with the following additional clauses. And I'm going to read these out loud because I know you love them. An entity wishing to redistribute in binary form or include this software in their product without redistribution of this software's source code with the product must also submit to these conditions where applicable. For every 1,000 units distributed, at least half of the employees or persons affiliated with the product must listen to the Der Entertanz, aka the Chicken Dance, as composed by Werner Thomas for no less than 2 minutes. For every 20,000 units distributed, one or more persons affiliated with the entity must be recorded performing the full Chicken Dance in an original video at the entity's own expense, and in video encoded in Ogtheora format, or a format of codec specified by the owner, at least 3 minutes in length, must be submitted to the owner, provided owner's contact information. Any and all copyrights to this video must be transferred to the original person who wrote the license. The dance featured in the video must be based upon the instructions on how to perform the chicken dance that you should have received with this software. Any employee or person affiliated with the product must be prohibited from saying the word Gazomimplat in public at all times, as long as distribution of the product continues. Now, sadly, this license is non-free, or we would have a lot of fantastic chicken dance videos on the internet. I have not gone to look for chicken dance videos on the internet. I'm just assuming they're not there. They also disclaim any liability for you injuring yourself while attempting to do the chicken dance. Here we have the Solipsistic public license. The text in that image is blurry, but it says, no object implies the existence of any other, which is the core concept of solipsism. The license requires that you accept that nothing besides you exists, including the software, the copyright holder, or even the license itself. Needless to say, this self-non-existent license doesn't actually work. All right. I'm going to go back to the deck because I'm done with the fun ones. Choosing the right license. Most common question when I finish this talk is, well, I don't know what the right license is for me. All right. There's a couple of different ways you can figure this out. There are some license choosers that are out there on the internet. GitHub has a pretty good one. The Free Software Foundation has a document that helps you to do this. Everybody's got a bias. Everybody who's telling you how to choose the license has got a bias. I've got a bias. They've got a bias. Everybody's got a bias. Free Software Foundation wants you to choose GPL. Apache wants you to choose Apache. GitHub wants you to choose licenses that are friendly to them. Google wants you to choose licenses that are friendly to them. Everybody's got their bias. Accept that bias and just be aware of it and try to make the decision. The questions are, the first question I ask people is, are you concerned about someone taking your code and not sharing their changes to it? If that's not a concern you have, then probably going down a permissive license path is fine for you. And it's probably pretty straightforward. It keeps things simple. It ensures the broadest compatibility with things. If not, then you probably want to look at something on the copyleft side of the fence. You want to look at a GPL style license. And there's plenty of licenses that are like GPL with different wording that you can sort of narrow down into. Most people are going to just go with GPL because it's widely used and widely compatible with itself. If you're really concerned about patents, then maybe looking at Apache and Apache style licenses. If you're really concerned about trademarks, maybe going with the Mozilla family of licenses. And that's pretty much the sort of broad structure. And again, if you have a specific use case that you're concerned around, talk to a lawyer. Whatever you do, don't write your own license. Fedora is tracking over 375 different licenses that people have put out there, and those are the good ones. We stopped listing the bad ones because we were encouraging bad behavior. And you don't need to write your own license. I really have seen very little cases in the last 5 years where someone has come up with a good reason to write a new license. Lots of people think they have come up with some sort of clever legal loophole. No, you're not clever. You're just being kind of a dick on the internet. It's not that. It's not how it works. Try to find a license for you. And if you really have found some sort of unique corner cases specific to your industry or your code or something where you say, I really need a unique license or an added clause or something, go get a lawyer. Get a lawyer that's skilled in IP law and have them write the license for you. And then when you're broke and crying, you'll realize it was a bad idea. Now, if you just want to understand more about this space without going to law school, there's a fantastic book that's out there. It was published by O'Reilly in 2008 by a guy named Van Lindbergh. It's called Intellectual Property and Open Source, A Practical Guide to Protecting Code. Van is an IP lawyer who also is an open source contributor. He is the best of both worlds. He's a very smart, very intelligent guy. He speaks at a lot of conferences on this topic when I'm not around. And he is a lawyer, so he has to be careful what he says, whereas I can say whatever I want and you guys can have fun with it. So but the book he wrote is fantastic. It's very thorough. It goes into all the details of it. It's still in print. It's a good book. It's thick. It's not easy reading. It's not light bedtime reading. But if you really want to understand the space and how it all fits together, then that's the great place to start. And at this point, I have no idea how over time I am. I'm not sure whether this phone is yelling at me to stop or whether somebody just left their alarms on it. But I will take questions from the audience. 7 minutes? Okay, cool. I have time for questions. Come talk into the mic if you'd like a question so that all the people watching on Google Hangout can, all two of you. Hi.
So you mentioned WTFPL. You mentioned WTFPL when you were talking about the crazy licenses, but that is still, at least in Fedora, that's still an accepted license, right?
You're right. So with the WTFPL, it's poorly written. We probably ought to have it as a non-accepted license, but enough people are just tickled by it, to be honest, that we got enough lawyers to tell us that, yeah, we know what you're trying to do there. Yes, we know that's poorly written. If you managed to get to court on the WTFPL, we feel like we could actually defend the intent of that license pretty clearly. That we could make it clear that we were attempting to do a complete abandonment of copyright and that the judge would go, well, you're stupid, but okay. And that's why we permit it even when we shouldn't. Any other questions about licensing, code, solipsism? All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the conference.
Your customers rely on your website or application. If it's slow or non-responsive, it infuriates your users and costs you money. Keeping your business-critical systems humming along requires insight into what they're doing. Your system metrics tell stories that can reveal performance bottlenecks, resource limitations, and other problems. But how do you keep an eye on all of your system's performance metrics in real time and record this data for later analysis? Enter Longview, the new way to see what's really going on under the hood. The Longview dashboard lets you visualize the status of all your systems, providing you with a bird's-eye view of your entire fleet. You can sort by CPU, memory, swap, processes load, and network usage. Click a specific system to access its individual dashboard, then click and drag to zoom in on choke points and get more detail. Comprehensive network data, including inbound and outbound traffic, is available on the Network tab, and disk writes and free space on the Disks tab, while the Process Explorer displays usage statistics for individual processes. The System Info tab shows listening services, active connections, and available updates. Adding Longview to a system is easy. Just click the button, copy the one-line installation command, then run the command on your Linux system to complete the process. The agent will begin collecting data and sending it to Longview. Then the graphs start rolling. Use Longview to gain visibility into your servers, so when your website or app heats up, it stays up.
Citrix Zen Server gives you everything you need to integrate, manage, and automate a virtual data center, all on an enterprise-class, cloud-proven virtual platform, and at a third of the cost of other solutions. But why even bother with virtualizing your server infrastructure in the first place? Well, let's say you have a traditional one server to one application architecture, but you're running out of resources and performance is suffering. Once you order new server hardware, you'll wait for delivery, configure it, install your business application, stage and test the server, and finally, add it to your production farm. If you've been through this process before, you know it can take weeks or even months. You also know it's a manually intensive process that will burden your team every time you outgrow your current setup. With a virtual server solution, you could accomplish all of that in less than half a day. Server virtualization software separates the OS and application from the underlying server hardware. And with multiple virtual machines on a single server, you can use each of them to run different OSs and applications. This makes it possible to move your virtual machines from one piece of hardware to another whenever you want, to maximize utilization, simplify maintenance, or recover from a hardware failure, and without slowing down your applications or users. Clearly, server virtualization provides big benefits. And Citrix Zen Server provides even more. Since it's built on an open platform, Zen Server plays well with your existing hardware, storage systems, and IT management software, as well as with the industry's leading cloud service providers. Best of all, you can get started by downloading a fully functional, production-ready version of Zen Server for free. After a 10-minute installation process, you'll see how easy it is to start virtualizing your workloads and automating your IT management processes. And when you're ready for a richer set of management tools, just upgrade to one of the premium editions of Zen Server. So whether you're interested in virtualizing servers for the first time, expanding your server virtualization footprint, or moving server workloads to the cloud, download and install Zen Server today and see how it can help you simplify your IT environment. Citrix Zen Server. Do more. Don't spend more.